It's strange, isn't it? The way people live their lives as if everything is normal, as if everything makes sense. They have no idea what goes on behind closed doors, especially at night. I'm a night clerk at a Supermart, and there are rules we follow that no one talks about. If you're a normal customer, you'd never know. You just come in, grab your items, and leave. That's the way it's supposed to be. But if you're like me, if you work the late shift, you know better. It all started about 6 months ago when I first took the job. The Supermart I work at is a large, older place, with high ceilings and rows upon rows of shelves packed with everything from canned goods to cleaning supplies. It's got that faint smell of stale air, mixed with the scent of old cardboard and plastic. The floors are always too cold, and the flickering lights make the place feel as if it's stuck in time, somewhere between day and night. That's the way it feels most nights, at least. When I started, the other night clerks warned me. At first, I thought it was just typical workplace horror stories. Tales of overzealous managers, strange customers, or late-night robberies. But then, when the rules started to make sense, I realized there was something much darker lurking beneath the surface. The first rule I learned was simple enough. 1. Never leave your post. It seemed obvious, right? I mean, I'm there to monitor the store, help with any issues, and make sure no one's doing anything suspicious. But as the nights wore on, I began to understand why this rule was so strictly enforced. The store is alive at night, and when you leave your post, something happens. You might think it's nothing more than paranoia or sleep deprivation. Trust me, I thought the same at first. But one night, I needed to use the restroom. I figured it'd be quick, just a few minutes, no big deal. The store was dead quiet, as it usually is. Only a few customers milling around in the aisles, and I'd be back before anyone noticed. I was wrong. I made it to the restroom at the far end of the store, near the employee area. It's a small, dingy room with cracked tiles and a broken mirror. As I walked past the supply closet, I heard a soft scratching sound like something was tapping against the walls. I froze. It was the kind of noise you hear in an old house at night, a sound that creeps under your skin. I thought it was just the pipes, maybe the building settling. But the sound grew louder, more deliberate. It sounded closer now, like footsteps. I looked around, but the hallway was empty. Thinking nothing of it, I entered the restroom and did my business. When I came out, the store had changed. The lights were dimmer, casting long, ominous shadows in every corner. The shelves seemed to have shifted, like they had moved ever so slightly since I'd left my station. There was a strange smell in the air now, a mixture of wet earth and something metallic, something unsettling. But what really bothered me was the silence. The store had always been quiet, but now it was too quiet. I couldn't hear the hum of the refrigeration units or the sound of the ceiling fans. It was as though the building itself was holding its breath. I hurried back to the front of the store, but as I passed the aisles, I noticed something strange. There were no customers, not a single soul in sight. The store was empty, except for the mannequins. The Supermart has these display mannequins that stand at the end of the aisles, dressed in whatever promotional clothing we're selling at the time. But now, they were positioned differently. Some were turned towards me, their faces frozen in unsettling smiles. Others had their heads turned completely around, their glass eyes staring blankly into the dark corners of the store. It was wrong. I wanted to leave, but I couldn't. My legs felt like lead, as if I were trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I reached my post and sat down behind the register, trying to shake off the feeling that something was wrong. Something was very wrong. I glanced at the clock. It was 2:38 a.m. That's when I heard the first knock. It was faint at first, coming from the back of the store. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was just the building settling again. But the knock came again, louder this time. It was rhythmic, deliberate, 3 sharp taps, followed by a long pause. Then 3 more. I could feel my heart begin to race. I checked the security cameras. Nothing. The back of the store was empty. There were no customers, no movement at all. I couldn't even see anything on the footage that resembled a shadow or a person. But the knocking continued. I called the manager's phone, but there was no answer. I called the other clerks, no one picked up. At this point, I was starting to panic. My mind raced, thinking of all the possible reasons for what was happening. Maybe it was just a prank. Maybe someone was messing with me. But the knocking wouldn't stop. And then I saw something. On the monitor for the storage area, a shadow moved across the screen. I blinked. At first, I thought it was just a glitch, maybe a bug crawling across the camera lens. But the shadow didn't move like an insect. It moved like a person, slow and deliberate. I watched as it moved closer to the back door. Then, without warning, it stopped. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't go back there. It was against the rules. That's when I remembered the second rule. The one they don't tell you until it's too late. 2. Never approach the back door after hours. They never tell you why, they just insist on it. The night shift is supposed to monitor the store, check the inventory, and keep things running smoothly. But there's something about the back door. Something unnatural. You might be wondering, what's so special about a door? Well, let me tell you, I didn't understand it until that night. The back door is always locked. At least it's supposed to be, and that's when I noticed it. The door wasn't locked anymore. I could see it on the monitor. Faint scratches on the glass where someone or something had been scraping at the door. The latch was undone. The door, barely ajar, creaked into silence. I should have followed the rule. I should have stayed behind the register, kept my head down, and waited until morning. But curiosity got the better of me. I stood up, slowly, my legs trembling as I moved toward the door. As I approached the storage room, I could feel a strange, icy sensation wash over me, like the temperature had dropped several degrees in an instant. I reached out for the door handle, and then I heard it, a whisper, faint but unmistakable. "Come closer." I froze, my hands still hovering over the door handle. The whisper wasn't coming from anywhere specific, it was everywhere. It was coming from inside the walls, the ceiling, the air itself. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling. No response. With one last, hesitant breath, I grabbed the door handle and pushed it open. But when I looked inside the storage room, there was nothing there. Just shelves of cleaning supplies and old stock. But there was an overwhelming sense of presence. The air felt thick, as if something unseen was waiting for me, watching from the shadows. Suddenly, the lights flickered, casting long, eerie shadows across the room. And then I heard it, a low, guttural growl. Something or someone was in there with me. The growl echoed through the air, a low, animalistic sound that seemed to reverberate through my bones. I froze, every muscle in my body locking in place. I shouldn't have opened the door. I shouldn't have come this far. My mind raced, searching for a rational explanation. It was just a sound, right? Just my imagination playing tricks on me. It had to be, but deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. There was something in there, something that shouldn't be. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, listening to the growl as it grew louder, more distinct. It sounded like something large, something capable of doing real damage. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, the weight of the silence pressing down on me. But I couldn't just leave. I couldn't ignore it. I had to know what was in that room. I stepped forward, cautiously, my eyes scanning the shelves of cleaning supplies. The fluorescent lights above flickered again, casting the room in an unsettling half-light. The growl had stopped, replaced by an eerie, heavy silence. I wasn't sure if that was worse. I moved slowly, inching forward, my heart pounding in my chest. My hand hovered near the door frame as I peered around the corner into the dimly lit storage room. The air was thick with the smell of dust and old chemicals. Nothing moved. The shelves stood like silent sentinels, their contents neatly stacked and undisturbed. I stepped inside, my shoes squeaking against the floor. The silence seemed to stretch on forever. I scanned the room, my eyes darting over every corner, every crack in the walls, but I saw nothing out of the ordinary. Then I heard it again, a faint rustling from the farthest shelf. My breath caught in my throat. I wasn't alone. I turned toward the noise, my heartbeat thunderous in my ears. Something was moving in the shadows, something large and shifting. My body froze as I saw it. A dark shape, low to the ground, with eyes that gleamed in the dim light. It was watching me. I couldn't breathe. My hands trembled as I reached for the nearest object, an old mop handle. I didn't know what I was expecting, but I needed something to defend myself. The shape in the shadows moved again, this time closer, its eyes glowing with an unnatural intensity. I tried to back away, but my legs wouldn't move. The weight of the moment held me in place like I was paralyzed. The creature stepped forward, its body a mass of shifting shadows, its eyes the only thing I could focus on. "Doge, what are you?" I managed to choke out, my voice barely a whisper. The creature didn't respond. Instead, it emitted a low, vibrating hum, like a growl mixed with a buzz. I didn't know if it was trying to communicate or if it was simply testing me, but I wasn't about to stick around and find out. Summoning every ounce of courage I had left, I turned and bolted for the door. My feet slipped on the smooth floor, but I didn't stop. I had to get out. I had to escape. As I reached the door, I felt something tug at my ankle, a sharp, cold sensation like fingers wrapped around my leg. I screamed and kicked, my foot connecting with something solid. The grip loosened, but the creature wasn't done. With a final, desperate lunge, I threw open the door and slammed it shut behind me. I stood there for a moment, gasping for breath, my heart pounding against my ribs. I had to get back to the front. I had to get back to the safety of the counter. But as I turned to leave, I realized something that made my stomach drop. The knocking was back. The rhythmic taps had returned, louder this time, like a countdown, echoing from somewhere deep within the store. The sound filled my ears, and for a moment, it seemed to drown out all other noise. My breath quickened, and I could feel my pulse in my throat. I glanced at the clock. It was 3:08 a.m. I was too far gone to back out now. There was something happening here, something I couldn't explain, and I needed to know what it was. I rushed back to my post, my footsteps echoing in the silence. The store was still empty, but the atmosphere had changed. The air was thick and heavy, as if the entire building was holding its breath. And then, I saw it. The mannequins. At first, I thought I was imagining it. They had been standing still before, like lifeless figures placed around the store. But now, they were moving. Their heads turned slowly, mechanically, as if responding to an unseen signal. Their eyes followed me, and I could feel them, watching, judging. There was no mistaking it now. They weren't mannequins anymore. They were alive. I backed away, my heart racing. The store had never felt this oppressive before. It felt like it was closing in on me, trapping me inside. The flickering lights above cast elongated shadows, making the mannequins seem even more terrifying, their features contorting in the dim light. The knocking grew louder, more frantic, as if urging me forward. I could hear my breath, shallow and ragged in my chest. I had to get to the back door. I had to figure out what was happening. As I moved toward the door, the air grew colder, the temperature dropping rapidly. I could see my breath in the air as I reached for the handle. And then, just as I was about to open it, the lights went out. Complete darkness. I stood frozen, my heart racing in my chest. The only sounds now were the thudding of my own pulse and the distant knocks that echoed like a heartbeat from the depths of the store. In the darkness, something shifted. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. It was close. So close I could almost hear its breath. And then, in the pitch black, a voice whispered in my ear. "You shouldn't have come." I spun around, but there was nothing there. Nothing but the suffocating darkness. The knocking stopped. The lights flickered back on. And when they did, the store was different. The shelves were completely rearranged. The aisles that had been familiar were now twisted, disorienting, like the store itself was bending reality. And the mannequins, they weren't standing anymore. They were gone. I was no longer alone. I don't know how much time passed in the darkness, but the feeling of being watched didn't go away. The shelves, they were different. The aisles twisted and turned in unnatural directions. The Supermart was no longer the place I knew. The layout had changed, like the store was alive, constantly shifting, and there was nothing I could do to make it stop. I blinked, trying to convince myself that I was still in control, that this was just some strange dream. But I knew it wasn't. I took a step forward, my feet uncertain on the cold, slick floor. The air was thick with the same metallic smell that I had smelled earlier, like rust, like something dying. Every movement I made felt as if the building was listening, waiting for me to make the next mistake. That's when I heard it again, the scratching. Faint at first, but unmistakable. It came from the farthest corner of the store, near the produce section, and it was accompanied by a low, rasping sound, as if something was dragging itself across the floor. I stood frozen, staring into the dark corner, my chest tightening with every second. The noise was getting louder. Whoever or whatever was making it wasn't hiding anymore. They wanted me to hear them. I knew I had to go toward it. I had no choice. The store, it had trapped me. With each step I took, the scratching grew louder. My breathing became shallow, like a weight pressing on my chest. I rounded a corner and found myself in an unfamiliar aisle, one I had never seen before. The shelves were stacked with products I didn't recognize. Boxes of strange, unmarked cans, dusty bottles with labels I couldn't make out. And there, standing in the middle of the aisle, was a mannequin. At least it looked like a mannequin, but it wasn't. It had a human form, yet its body was stiff, almost rigid, like it was carved out of wood. The figure was facing the wall, its back to me. The scratching noise stopped as I approached, and the air grew colder still. I reached out, my fingers trembling as they hovered near its shoulder. I had to know. I had to touch it. Before I could, the figure spun around, its head snapping toward me with unnatural speed. Its eyes, hollow, black voids, stared into mine, as if it could see into my very soul. I stumbled back, my heart hammering in my chest. And then it spoke. "They're coming for you." The voice was cold, distant, like a whisper from the beyond. I couldn't respond. I was paralyzed, rooted to the spot. The mannequin, no, the thing in front of me, stepped forward, its limbs jerking with each movement, and I felt something cold, something sharp scratch at the back of my neck. I whipped around, but there was nothing there. Before I could react, the figure raised its arm and pointed down the aisle, its fingers shaking but precise. "Follow the path," it said, its voice now a distorted, guttural rasp. "The door will close soon." I didn't know what it meant, but I had no choice. Something was chasing me, something worse than the mannequins. I had to find the door. I had to get out before it was too late. I turned, sprinting down the aisle, past shelves that seemed to move as I passed, like they were closing in on me. The store was shifting, changing around me, and every time I blinked, the layout was different. The path ahead was always blocked by something. Either the shelves would suddenly move in front of me, or I'd find myself in the same aisle again, as if the store had swallowed me whole. And then in the distance I saw it. The back door. The only thing that had remained unchanged. A glimmer of hope in the overwhelming chaos. I pushed through the aisles, ignoring the strange whispers and the scraping sounds that followed me, growing louder with each passing second. But as I reached the door, I found it locked. My stomach sank. I had to get out. I had to get through. I pounded on the door with my fists, panic rising in my throat. There was no time. The knocking was getting louder, closer. And then, the voice spoke again, but this time, it wasn't the mannequin. It was coming from somewhere deep within the store. "You should never have left." I spun around, my breath coming in sharp gasps. The aisles were empty again. The store had gone quiet. Suddenly, the lights went out. The door was still locked, but the silence was deafening. My heart hammered in my chest, my mind screaming for me to run, but I couldn't move. I was trapped inside a store that had become something far more dangerous than a mere building. And then I heard it, a shuffle, slow and deliberate. I whipped my head around, looking for the source, but I couldn't see anything in the darkness. The sound was getting closer, too close, and I knew, with a sickening certainty, that whatever was coming was not something I could outrun. I turned back to the door, my hand shaking as I fumbled with the handle, trying to force it open. It wouldn't budge. My mind raced as I turned to the shelves beside me, looking for something, anything, that could help. But the shelves seemed to shift before my eyes, the products morphing into bizarre, incomprehensible items. I couldn't make sense of them, couldn't figure out what they were. The sound was growing louder. It was almost on me. I knew that if I turned around, I wouldn't survive. But then, I heard it, a click. The door. It was unlocked. I threw my body against it, forcing it open. The door slammed against the wall as I stumbled out into the hallway. I turned and slammed it shut behind me, my body pressed against the cold concrete wall. I was outside now, outside the store, but something felt off. I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't escaped at all. I looked up and saw the store's front doors looming ahead, illuminated by the faint glow of streetlights. I couldn't leave. Not like this. I had to go back. I had to figure out what was happening. I turned back to the doors, but as I stepped toward them, I felt a sharp, cold grip on my shoulder. And then I heard the voice again. You've opened the door, and now it's too late. The grip tightened, pulling me back. I spun around to face it, but the hallway was empty. No one was there. I was alone, but the doors were closed, and they were locked. The grip on my shoulder tightened once more, pulling me back toward the closed doors. My body tensed as I struggled to free myself, but the pressure was too much. Something unseen, something malevolent, was dragging me in. I spun around, heart racing, and found myself face to face with the blank wall of the hallway. But the hallway had changed. It was no longer the sterile, concrete corridor I remembered. The walls were now warped, as though the building itself was bending and twisting, creating an infinite loop. I tried to look away, but the walls were closing in. I could feel them, like they were alive, suffocating me with their proximity. You shouldn't have opened it, the voice whispered again, a low hiss that scraped at my ears. It was the same distorted voice I'd heard earlier, the one that came from everywhere and nowhere. It wasn't human, and it wasn't just a voice. It felt like a warning. I struggled, but my limbs felt heavy, as if the gravity itself had changed. The more I tried to move, the more it felt like the world was pressing down on me. Panic consumed me, my mind racing for a way out, but there was nothing. The store, no, the entity had trapped me. The store had always had rules, rules I had never questioned. Simple ones: close the doors at night, don't touch the forbidden shelves, never wander into the storage rooms. Always keep an eye on the cameras, but none of that mattered anymore. The rules had been broken, and now the consequences were coming. I looked back toward the store's entrance, the front doors now looming far in the distance. But they weren't the same. They were distorted, twisting, as if the building itself was trying to swallow them. The small patch of streetlight that had been outside was gone, replaced by a swirling black void. The night outside had disappeared. The world beyond had dissolved into nothingness. The door behind me creaked open. I turned to see the storage room door swing wide, revealing the depths of the Supermart's darkness. The room, where it had all started, beckoned me with its empty space. And yet, something inside me screamed to stay away. I could feel the presence, the cold, oppressive force that seemed to flow from the room. But the voice had spoken again. It is the only way. My blood ran cold. The rules had shifted again. It wasn't just the store that was alive, it was everything in it. I had no choice but to step forward. Something had changed, and I had no idea what awaited me inside. I had been a part of this place for so long, but now I was becoming a part of it in ways I could never have imagined. I forced my legs to move, step by agonizing step. As I passed the shelves, I noticed the mannequins again. They were staring at me, their eyes wide and hollow. But they weren't still. They were moving. Their limbs twitched, their heads turning slowly, watching me as I walked by. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The room at the end of the hall loomed closer. The door was open now, but inside, the shadows were alive. There was a presence there. It felt like 1,000 hands were reaching out for me. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around and run, but the voice held me in place. You have broken the rules, and now the door is open. You must follow it. I crossed the threshold. The room was a vortex. The shelves, the products, the walls, all of it seemed to fold in on itself. Reality was unraveling. I stepped forward, each footstep a heavy thud in the silence. The air was cold, too cold. It felt like the temperature had dropped to below freezing. I could see my breath in front of me. The door slammed shut behind me, and then I saw it. At the center of the room was a table, black and slick, covered in strange markings I couldn't decipher. Symbols, like a language older than time, were etched into the surface. There was something familiar about it. I couldn't explain why, but I had seen these markings before. Somewhere. A memory, or maybe a warning. Beside the table lay a key. A rusted, old key. Its shape was strange, unlike anything I'd ever seen. Its metal was worn, aged, as though it had been lost for centuries. My hand reached out without my command. It was as if the key called to me. The moment my fingers touched the cold, metal surface, a jolt of energy surged through me, sharp and blinding. The room shuddered. I could hear the knocking again. The rhythm was louder, more insistent now. It was coming from everywhere, vibrating through the walls. And then, the whisper returned, but it was no longer a whisper. It was a roar, a cacophony of voices all screaming at once. You should never have opened the door. I pulled my hand away from the key. It fell to the floor with a heavy clang, but it was too late. The room began to twist and warp, the walls bending inward. The floor buckled beneath me. I tried to run, but the store itself was closing in, squeezing the life out of everything inside it. The aisles were endless, the shelves too high to climb. The store had consumed me. It had absorbed my every action, every mistake. I was no longer a clerk. I was part of the store. The last thing I remembered before everything went black was the key. It was floating in the air, its shape distorting, and I could hear the voice one last time. The store will always find you. There are rules, and those who break them, they become a part of the rules. When I woke, I was standing in front of the doors, but they were closed. I was back at the entrance of the store. The lights above flickered, and the shelves were neatly stacked. The mannequins stood still, but I knew it was different now. I knew what I had become.